Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Baruch Hashem, we have a nice crowd of people here to remember Rav Nachum Eliezer Rabinovitch, Morenu v'Rabbeinu. And this is basically an opportunity for those of us who learned with him, who had a kesher with him, to remember the tkufa, especially, that he was in the UK before he came to Israel. A number of people continued that relationship into whilst he was here in Israel, in Ma'ale Adumim. I had some kesher with him beyond, but not that much. So there's others here who did. And it was important to me that we do something. I have to share with you that sometimes it's only after somebody passes away does the full impact of the influence that they had on you, does it become clear. And I was really I was surprised at how broken I was when I heard the news. And that's when I realized what an incredible influence Rav Nachum had on my life, on my derech, on my learning, on my approach to Yadut. And I mentioned earlier today to Gila, who was also with us, that the only other time that happened was when the late Mickey passed away, and I found myself in a state realizing how much he had given me. And it was sometimes it's the Acharei Mot Kedoshim syndrome, and so I found myself watching and listening to a number of hespedim, predominantly coming out from Ma'ale Adumim, from the yeshiva, and it was fascinating to hear so many things which, even though they got to know Rav Nachum much later, they were saying things which were all very familiar to me and to many of the people who I'm sure who are here too. My personal story is that I'd returned a few years earlier from yeshivot. In Israel, I was spent 6 years, 4 years in yeshiva high school, 2 years in yeshiva. And I came back to the UK and was getting very involved in chinuch. I had a daily chavruta, I was committed, but I returned from yeshiva with a great respect for my rabbanim, but I did not identify with any of them. None of them actually were for me what I considered to be a true Talmid Chacham, somebody who represented all the ideals of Yadut. Many of them had bits of it, but none of them had all of it. And it was a source of frustration, and it was basically forcing me to sort of find my own way. At some stage, a friend of mine, Josh Cohen, recommended that I go and listen to a shiur from Rav Nachum at Jews College. I'd heard about him, and Dino, at the time, the late Dino Rabinovitch, was working for me in Hampstead Teenage Center. And I went to hear a shiur, and the rest, as they say, is history. And I moved from University College to Jews College, and the last 2 years of my university career in England were together with Michael, with Johnny Gutentag, Johnny Rogans, and we had the most wonderful chavura, learning with the Rav. We were a spoilt group. We were studying with Rabbi Dr. Irving Jacobs, the then Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, before he became a sir or a lord, the late Sidney Lepra, and of course, Rav Nachum, and it was unbelievable. We had this sense of being part of this secret club. And this is a sentiment which I heard a lot when I was listening to the Hespedim. One of them called it Moadon HaYedidim. And this secret club was those of us who we were learning with Rav Nachum. we were totally aware that we were sitting at the feet of somebody who is an unbelievable Talmid Chacham and Gadol Hador, and nobody else knows about it. We were totally aware that Anglo Jewry certainly did not know how to recognize the Gedulah of Rav Nachum. They did not appreciate his Gadlut, and certainly didn't bother him. He had his Talmidim, and of course, his most famous Talmid being Rav Sachs. But we basically were part of this small group. And one of the reasons is, I believe, is because of his humility. He didn't know how to spell the word self-promotion. He couldn't do it. It wasn't part of his lexicon. It was genuine. He was just who he was. He had total confidence in who he was, right? As Michael sent me the tape last week where we heard him say, and if the Rambam would have heard what I've just said, he probably would have agreed. I mean, he could say that and get away with it. And when he came here to Israel, likewise, for many years, it was a small group of people who knew the truth. And only recently, especially since the Yad Pshuta came out in most of its volumes, did people recognize that he was, in fact. And when I listened to the Hesped that Rav Melamed gave, he said, Rav Nachum Rabinovitch was a Gadol Hador. Now, how do I know that? He says, how do I know he was a Gadol Hador? Because he says, most Rabbanim, who are great Rabbanim, they see Judaism as many different pieces that somehow sit together. But they're basically, there's something here and there's something there. He says, Rav Nachum Rabinovitch was a posek, was a Rosh Yeshiva, was a mad'an, was a mensch, had people skills, and for him it was all one singular reality. And when all of those things at the level of which he had was one singular reality, that is the definition of a Gadol Hador. So I'm quoting him because it was far more eloquent than what I could say. In my own personal life, I certainly found myself around my Shabbat table quoting Rav Nachum many times. I wouldn't say every week, but many weeks. And at some stage, as my kids were getting older and going to the yeshivot, they would say, Abba, I know he was your Rav, but, I mean, there's others, Lo Shamanu Alav. And as time went on, when all of a sudden, his name did get out there, they turned around and they said, Wala, Abba, ech yadata? And I said, yeah. And then they said the same about, I was quoting Jonathan Sachs as well. And this was before we became a rock star. And it was, so we were really spoilt. And I feel very grateful that I had that time with him. And I feel the loss, not just the loss that he's passed away, but maybe the time I could have had with him during this tkufa that he was in Israel that I didn't. But I certainly feel that I owe him so much about what I am and what I do for Klal Yisrael I got from him. That's by way of introduction. And I was schmoozing with Michael earlier, just over a week ago, and came up with this idea. And many of you who are here are part of the idea, and I thank you all for being here. And what I'm going to do now is basically ask certain individuals who have already told me in advance, but this is an opportunity for everybody to express themselves here. In particular, Kavod Gadol Lanu, Rabbi Dr. Abraham Levy, Rav Rashi of the Sephardi community in the UK. Retired. Well, I have a feeling these things are never quite. It's a life appointment, if I'm not mistaken. And I would ask Rabbi Levy to share with us his memories and comments on Rabbi Rabinovitch.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It is a great honor for me to be here, and thank you very much, Marfakla, for arranging all this. I just want to share with you a few thoughts which might almost be contradictory as regards my relationship with Rabbi Rabinovitch. I was very involved in Jews College when he arrived, and to be very honest, he was never very happy in London. He believed that London was not the place that created Talmidei Chachamim, and in fact, the only two people he only gave semicha to two people all the time that he was in London. And one, of course, was Lord Sachs. There's one thing, though, which he loved in London, and that is that he had the opportunity of seeing some of the most remarkable kitvei yad available in the world. He did this because the Montefiore Endowment, of which I am the honorary principal, had a collection of the kitvei yad which was sold to Chacham Gasta by a collector, and Chacham Gasta bought these kitvei yad of Leopold Zunz for £1,000, and they were deposited at Jews College. And I know that he loved this, and in fact he used a lot of his time looking at these kitvei yad for his scholarship and the books that he was writing. And it is in that connection that he was very critical of me, and I tried to defend myself. What happened was that I decided that this kitvei yad had already been microfished and available everywhere in the world, and I needed to create a kollel of Montefiore Endowment, and the only way we could do it was to sell some of these manuscripts. And he said to me, you should not have done that, you should have kept them. So I said to him, I had the choice, either to keep all the manuscripts or to sell some of them to create a kollel, and eventually to create a kollel of Dayanim, which is in fact what we did. And it was in fact Rabbi Rabinovitch who introduced me to Eretz Chemda, and as a result of that introduction, we were able to work with Eretz Chemda, with Rabbi Carmel and Libnat, and thank God we are able to produce rabbis, we are able to produce Dayanim, 25 of them all over the world. And he and Rabbi Rabinovitch actually signed, literally a few months before he died, the semicha for the students of the Montefiore Endowment. So all I can say is that we owe him a lot. So,
Gila, can you hear me?
Right. Well, then I'll speak for a few minutes now. I've had the good fortune and the very unusual fortune to have been able to experience a number of Gedolim, as to be, as in the old parlance, a Talmid, Talmidah in my case, but it was a very, very unusual and fortunate experience for me. And I had experienced the possibility to learn from Rav Nachum. It was the idea of my late husband, and it was helped by Louise, but it was really a gift of Rav Nachum to his wife, who asked him if I could come and learn with him. So it's like with Rabbi Kiva, her Torah is mine. But so I say that in her memory as well. And I had it was a great gift to be able to go and learn from Rav Nachum. And I want to mention three kind of things I learned from him. The first was that I went to learn Gemara. And I was a relative beginner. He was my first Gemara Rebbe. And although he was a Rebbe for very advanced students, he was a wonderful Gemara Rebbe for somebody who was not advanced, because he taught you, I didn't have to unlearn any habits that he would not have wanted from before. So what did he teach me? I learned that, first of all, I should start with the psukim. If you don't know the pasuk, don't try to read the Gemara. First, make sure you know the psukim. He once asked a question, it came up in the Gemara, how do you know that they used to wash clothes in wine? And none of the boys knew. And he looked around and he said, what are you doing here learning Gemara? So, under his breath, he said it, because he didn't want to. So, the first thing was to read psukim. The second thing was to face the Gemara, to confront the Gemara by yourself, to look at the daf, and to be in relationship with the daf, to try. And the third was, at the time anyway, there was no art scroll, there was no even Rav Steinsaltz hadn't done his Perush yet. So there was no other choice, really. But, okay, you had to face the daf. And then we went to the Rif. Before Rashi, not even Rashi, straight to the Rif. And then we went to the Mishnah Torah and trying to understand, how did the Rambam construe that page in order to get to where he got in his Mishnah Torah? Because you're looking at an encyclopedia of Jewish law to figure out how he read the page. Then after that, you took a look at Rashi and you said, well, how is Rashi understanding the page? Or maybe they had a different girsa even. How is he understanding the page in relation to how the Rambam was understanding the page? And then maybe you looked at some Tosfot. And then I think once in the whole year, we looked at an Achron to see how not to learn. So this was unbelievable. I didn't know how other people learn Gemara. That's how I first learned how to learn. And it was a wonderful way to learn Gemara, whether you were really very advanced already and had gone to yeshiva for years, as some of the other people sitting there had, or whether you hadn't. Your background was in other things, and you didn't really know how to approach a daf. And suddenly somebody said to you, you can walk in and you can approach a daf. So that was the first kind of thing I learned from him. And afterwards, learned other ways of learning, but this is still a great part of how, when I try to introduce people to Gemara, I can introduce them to the daf. The second thing I learned from him, I can't say I learned from him, I experienced with him. I can't say I learned it all the way, but was to how to think about some of the bigger questions, the larger issues, not just the trees, but the forest. How to think about development of halacha. How to look at the Chumash and say, not only what are the mitzvahs in the Chumash, but which way is the Chumash pointing as to which way Yahadut should go? Where should it take us? How do we understand what it's saying to help us understand what we should be doing today, the decisions we should be making today? I'll give you an example. He later wrote about this in a sefer, but at the time he was thinking these ideas out, and he came to talk a few times about it in Yakar. For example, if we're looking at Avdus, how do I know what the Chumash feels about Avdus? Not just what do I think about Avdus, but is what I'm feeling there? It says everybody's B'Tselem Elokim, and there still is allowance of Avdus. Well, what is the Chumash? Which way is the Chumash trying to push you? Forward beyond that there's Avdus. And it's not just, don't try to see, is it my hang? Look and see what the Chumash is telling you. What Chazal are trying to tell you. What are the values? Which direction are they trying to point you? So that was the second thing. Or for instance, when you see a Medrash Halacha, how do you know if they're really drawing it out of that pasuk or if it's an asmachta? And he pushed you very much to use your own mind, how it looked to you. And this was very tremendously opening up for me, that I was supposed to try to actually trust. And once I said to him, how do I know if I can trust what looks to me logical? And he looked at me and said, well, learn some more and you'll have more trust in your logic, right? So there's a sense of developing your mind and your emotions and using them in your attempt to learn. And having trust in that, the more you learn, the more you have trust in it. And the third thing that I learned from him, and that was more once I already lived in Israel, is I would go to him sometimes for psak. or to discuss psak, either something personal or something somebody else had brought me. And some of these were very big issues having to do with, for instance, abortion in a case where there was somebody who had been abused. Really very difficult and problematic issues. And sometimes what he would say to me is, I can't judge that issue. I'm not in your shoes. I'm not there on the scene. I'm not understanding all the details. What I can do is I can show you what I would use, and it would be in halacha, in meta halacha, in ideas, in values, all over the place in the world of Torah and Chazal and Tshuva. What I would use to help me if I had that question. And I didn't really understand that other poskim don't do that. They don't say to you, you didn't come to me for an answer. You came to me for help to deal with the question that you have. That's what you came for. You think you came for an answer. No, you didn't come for an answer. You came to be trained to learn how to think about the issues that you're dealing with. That's what he taught me. That was what he was there for, was to help me grow and help me understand how to deal with the issues that were coming my way and how to be open to them and to litmoded, to try to deal with them in some kind of way. And sometimes the things that people were bringing me were very difficult, and it was almost very arresting for somebody to say, but I'm not here to answer. That's not what I'm here for. And he felt that wasn't what halacha was for very often. He had a vision, which he expressed to me, that people think that you have less choice if you're shomer mitzvahs, because you're told so many things what to do. But in actual fact, learning helps you to see, to understand the issues and the depth and complexity of issues, and you end up with more choice. There were great experiences learning or trying to be a Talmud of his. And I will close with one of the most, however, embarrassing experiences of my life, which I'm sure he didn't mean to cause, was caused when I had an exam with him, and in front of all sorts of people, besides in front of him. And it was on a daf, which I had not seen till the day before. And for me, I thought my job was to learn the daf within those 24 hours. And instead, he turned to me and he said, how did this daf change your understanding of statistics, of laws of probability? This was a little bit difficult for somebody who had not thought in great depth of the laws of probability before they got to that daf in Chulin, and were trying desperately to get to grips with the daf in Chulin. But what I understood from him was that the job wasn't just to get to grips with the daf in Chulin. It was to let the daf in Chulin grip me and change me. I never told him just how horrific that moment was. One of those seconds when you say, what am I going to do? But I have him to thank for all that, for a sense of the life of it and of the brilliance of it, and of the chance to try to understand Torah and to let Torah change me. So thank you very much, Mayor, for creating this opportunity.
Thank you, Gila. You remind me, and maybe some of us here, the sense of what you describe as his desire to empower us. That was his thing. Whenever we would come with a shelat psak, he would never answer us. He would say, "Well, what have you figured out? Have you checked? Have you checked the sugya? Have you checked the Shloshim? Yeah. And what did you come up with?" And we'd say, and he said, "And what's wrong with that?" We said, "Well, that's why we're here." He says, "Well, if you're happy with it, why have you come to me?" You don't, as you said, you don't hear that from a posek. They have, I'm this authority, and you came to me, and I will now give you my wisdom. But Nachum, that was not the case. He was only interested in empowering us. And in terms of what you said about his letting the daf grip you, I don't remember what it was. Maybe Michal does. It was We were learning something in Masechet Shabbat, and we were looking at the Rashi, and there were two words at the end of the Rashi, which seems somewhat stum. And he said, well, what are those two words doing there? And we all looked at him and said, don't know. He said, well, if I take these two words away, would you understand the Rashi? And I said, yeah, I'm sure. Rashi's easy, even without those two words. And he yelled at us, how can you sleep at night? There's two words of Rashi. How do you sleep at night? I remember it's like, that night I could not sleep. I was like, why didn't, what? And I think I never even understood why those two, but that was what he demanded of us. He demanded of us to be bothered. Doesn't it bother you? That was his catchphrase. Doesn't it bother you? If you're not bothered, you can't learn. And he would always ask us, what bothers you here? And that was, I think he was genuinely upset with us that we thought that those two words of Rashi were basically stum. They weren't necessarily there. Okay, Rabbi Gundagi, I'm going to unmute. Okay, now talk.
Thank you. It's a cover to Rabbi Nachum, cover Amace, and thank you for doing it on our behalf, for being motzi us all with that. I think as well, it's also as you put it, it's a sort of form of access to emotion and availus for us all, that you enabled us to come together in this way and sort of key in with thoughts from former years. I knew Rabbi Nachum as a student, as you said, in 81 to 83 when I was in Jews college. So it was only 81 to 82 when he was actually there. And no, was it 81? It was 83 as well, but 81 and then part of 83 as well. Okay, very briefly, I want to just say one thing that I remember from him, and then share with you, if it's possible, to do a screen share with something I found just while we were talking. I found that I just also want to share just in a manner of screen share. And so I would ask our dear host, Mayor, to make me the host for the minute so that I can do a screen share as well. You okay with that? Can you make me a host? Do you know how to do that?
1 second. You can now. No, that's it. You can.
I can screen share.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll do that in a minute. Let me firstly say that the simple thing that's etched in my mind. Actually, there's two things etched in my mind. The first one is that he used to say about learning Gemara. He said, "You've only really understood it if you can explain it to a goy," which is such you've got such clarity in what you've learnt that you could explain any sugya that you've learnt. You can explain it to a non-Jew. Then you've really understood it. And if you can't, it means you haven't really understood it. I every so often I think of it as, nail the ragli, do it. Have I really broken this down into its components? It's just knowledge. It's breakable down into components, and could I unpack it and then repackage it again for a non-Jew? And I don't think that's a Milsa Zutra. I think that was really his bakashat ha'emet, that he was able to sort of burrow down to the essence of the matter and see the wood for the trees. And I really, it's really helped me a lot, I find, over the years. That's number one. The other memory that I have is that it was actually something that somebody said when they sat in a shir. I think it was in Perek Kira when we were studying Perek Kira, maybe the Sugi of Muktzah, the Sugi of Perek Kira, and I won't say who it was, but he came to the college. Maybe you remember who it was. He sat in the shir, and he commented afterwards to me, and I felt very humbled by it. He said, "It's unbelievable. It's like having Einstein, teach to a bunch of," I can't remember what he said, but you can imagine what he said. This was a Talmud Chacham who'd come specially visiting London, and he'd come to listen to a shir of Rabbi Nachum, and he said it's like having Einstein coming and lecturing to a class of O-level students or something like that, which was suitably humbling, but it was a cherished thing because it showed in what great high esteem Rab Nachum Zechron Bracha was to be held. Let me screen share and take you to. I just while this is going on, I googled Nachum Eliezer in Igros Moshe, and here's Igros Moshe. There's two things that come up if you Google Nachum Eliezer. Are you with me? Somebody put their hand up and show that they're with me. Rabbi Levi, just will you wave at me? Oh, thank you. So here's the first one. It's a tshuva from 1957, Tafshin Yud Zayin 1956, to Charleston, to Rabbi Rabinovitch in Charleston when he was the Rav of Charleston in West Charleston, Virginia, and
South Carolina.
South Carolina. Thank you. And it's on the matter of how to write Charleston and its rivers in a get. So and as you can see there, it's on the matter of Charleston. It's not known whether a get's been arranged there before, and it's far distant from places an experienced rabbi. And they write their get in it sometimes, to send to another place, and tircha chashash igun, and the woman will get married without the get in another place. So certainly, Rabbi Feinstein advises Rab Nachum that you should fix there the definitive spelling of the city and the rivers in order that they should be able to write a get there and refrain from igun and ashes ish. And okay, I won't read the whole thing, but basically, Rabbi Feinstein endorses Rabbi Rabinovich's Charleston with an aleph after the shin, etc. And you can see that towards the end of it, that for Kamosha Hiskim Loi Harav Henkin, you did Harav Henkin. So in other words, Rabbi Rabinovitch is seen here as a major posek with individual halachic authority and ability, and the Gadol Hador, Rabbi Feinstein, and indicating that similarly Rabbi Henkin, the great rabbi of America at the time as well, that they sort of samchu yadav alav on his halachic decisions. And that's just that's one sphere of Torah and halachic psak from the 1950s when Rabbi Rabinovitch would have just been, I think he was born in 1928. He was just under 30. This is 1956. Okay, it's 28. So the 20-year Reb Nachum had got the endorsement of Rabbi Feinstein for his halachic rulings in the matter of Gittin in Charleston. The other one is in where are we? In Hilchas Mikvos, Zochlin imitarin mishu'uvin, and this is actually a tshuva by Rabbi Feinstein to Rabbi Ruderman, the great Rosh Yeshiva, who was Rabbi Rabinovitch's Rebbe in Ner Yisrael in Baltimore.
Father-in-law.
Was his father-in-law as well? I didn't know that. Was his father-in-law?
Yeah, Ruth was a Ruderman.
No, not. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Not the father-in-law. The Rebbitzin was Rav Ruderman's niece.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I stand corrected.
Okay, good. Thank you for that information, though. It's good to learn these things together. And he called him, Rabbi Feinstein called him a Talmida Hanichbad Harav of Nachum Eliezer Rabinovitch, and the concern was an Oitze Echad Lezuria, that in mikvahs you've got different forms of boros next to the mikvah, and the boros Zuria from which the water goes straight to the Beis HaTfilah, and Rabbi Rabinovitch had raised the concern that or dealt with the issue of zechila, that perhaps in the attempt to provide a kosher mikveh through Zuria, sowing the town water through a tank of kosher rainwater for the purpose of the mikveh, perhaps it was self-cancelling because of the problem of Zochlin, that the thing was actually moving, which would not be, which is not okay in regard to a mikveh. And so, very simply, with computer aid of the Barilan database, been able to just simply to share with you, my thoughts and appreciation of Reb Nachum as a Gadol Hador, as somebody at home in the most sort of technical halacha, and with endorsement of the great rabbis of the previous generation on him as a natural sort of halachic master, and as a man of great practicality, as well as having to practically implement, although he was an academic and a scholar. But so you can see there's Hilchas Gittin and Hilchas Mikvos, which are the basis of a proper, a traditional, authentic Jewish life, which he was taking communal responsibility for. And this is for me an illustration from the pages of the Igros Moshe, just in a live manner, what a great man he was, and what a privilege it was to study under him. I think, as Meir said, if we knew, if we had appreciated then what we appreciate now, then we could have got a lot more out of him, so much more. And I thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he gave me the opportunity to have that exposure to him. And he was an inspiring influence on my life, I believe, and on so many others, clearly. And zechro Baruch.
Thank you, Rabbi Gutentag. I remember when you arrived in Israel, we call these guys shokistim. You'd come in from Gateshead. Vaita shokist lechalutin.
Coming from Itri Yeshiva in Israel, actually. But
yes, I think for some reason, I don't know, I remember that you came via Gateshead or whatever. It doesn't matter.
May I say a word about the Ketivat Haget, if I may?
Yes, please, Rabbi Levi.
The fact remains that the Spanish and Portuguese community have been writing Gittin from the 17th century. And the question is how to spell the river Thames, Al-Nehar Tamesis. And to this day, the Ashkenazi Batei Din, following the original tradition, still write Tamesis in the way that we wrote it in the 17th century. I only wish that they would agree with us on other more important points, equally important points.
So,
Rabbi Levi, if you don't mind me adding something to that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Michael ben Gershon. There's actually quite an important historical scholar who has written a number of papers on how the Ashkenazim in London copied a lot of the Sephardi customs because the Sephardim were there first.
So,
yes, but that, I'm afraid, has not carried on.
That's what you think.
In fact, I mean,
You'd be surprised.
They are not particularly happy that Rabbi Carmel and I have arranged to teach Dayanim all over the world, 25 of them, and they were not happy about that at all.
I growing up in Letchworth, I grew up basically on the knees of Rabbi Suleiman Dawood Sassoon, and he would certainly not hide his disdain from the Ashkenaz monopoly on halacha, and would often comment about what a different world it would be if that was not the case. Back to what Rabbi Gutentag was talking about in terms of psika. I'll never forget, during one of the classes, Rav Nachum started telling us something about what happened in Toronto as the rabbi of Clanton Park. He said, well, I got together, he said, all the rabbis in Toronto in order to ban glut butchery. He said, glut, the concept of glut kosher, in my opinion, he said, and in everybody's opinion, is an affront to the halachic system, because it means that there's no such thing as a question. The minute you say, when in doubt, do without, which he would say in his Canadian accent, when in doubt, do without, that is an affront to the halachic process. The whole point is when you have a question to deliberate and decide whether or not it is kosher or it is not kosher. And you decide, it's not objectively is or isn't, you decide through your psika. It is us that makes it kosher or not kosher. And I got all the rabbis together, he said, and they agreed. And we gave this whole thing that there's no longer any glut kosher butchery in Toronto. And then he started laughing. And he said, and I'm a little bit familiar with the Toronto politics. He said, and then the Hungarians got upset. And they didn't know what to do. And an enterprising young man by the name of Moshe Glatt opened up a butcher store called Glatt Butchers. Anyway, so first of all, it also gave us an insight into his rather dry humor, but also the fact that he cared passionately about the halachic process, and the fact that he was prepared to get together all the Rabbanim to ban the concept of Glatt because it was an affront to the halachic process, said something. I said, who has the gall to try and do something? Nirei otchem, do that today. The other thing, in terms of Talmidei Chachamim, we had the privilege of being visited by the two Rabbanim Rashiyim of Israel. First, Arav Goren, and then Arav Ovadia. And they both came to the college. That was like on the thing, when you come to England, you come to the college, you give a shiur klali. And I had the privilege of either giving Rav Nachum a ride home or getting a ride. I don't remember which. But we were schmoozing in the car on the way back. And I asked, I said, well, now we've heard them both. What's your verdict? So he said, well, it's clear that Rav Ovadia has an incredible encyclopedic breadth of knowledge, which is second to none. And there's nothing out there that he doesn't know. And he has, on the horizontal level, access to everything, and he knows how to bring everything that he has on that level into the discussion in order to bring in all the information that you need in order to make a psak. L'umat zot, Rav Goren has a depth. He knows how to drill down to such amazing depths that it is also incredible that he goes into the details and he uncovers the major underpinning issues that are there in the system. And then he says, but the problem is, Rav Goren is a wild man, and that's I'm sort of paraphrasing what he said, and therefore people won't take him seriously, which is a shame, he said. And it was fascinating to hear his insight on those two gedolim. And now Michael has found his mic, and we're going to go back to Michael to hear what he has to say.
Can I just give my apologies? Going to get to a certain point in a few minutes' time. I've got to go offline and deal with Rabbi Zoom things at this time of the evening. I'm sorry.
Thank you for joining us. Good to see you. Michael.
Well, I'm not going to talk about halacha at all. And you stole my story about the Rashi. And in actual fact, I had to move machines because I couldn't get the mic working on the other machine. So I can't play you the soundtrack of it was the Maharam, actually. But I'd like to say a number of things. First of all, as has been mentioned before by others, he was extraordinarily demanding. A lot of the more recent Talmidim of his here in Israel look at him as they'd call him a Rambamist. But the thing was that, yes, you can only understand the Rambam properly if you've understood all of his teachers, the Rimigash, the Rif, and so on. But on the other hand, you couldn't really know what was going on in the Sugya either without understanding pretty much all of the Achronim. And he'd... I remember on one of the recorded shurim that I've been listening to recently, he says, "You mean you didn't see the Rashash? How can you learn the Tosfos without the Rashash?" And likewise, all kinds of other achronim. You don't have to agree with Reb Chaim on the Rambam, but have you seen Reb Chaim on the Rambam? Did you understand Reb Chaim on the Rambam? and you couldn't be chaylik on Reb Chaim without understanding Reb Chaim. It was the depth of learning which captivated me. Now, you know, some of you know that when I was at Jews College, I was very much in the Bnei Akiva Kippah Sruga world. And over the years, I mean, you know, we're talking about almost 40 years, I've migrated to the rather extreme nether regions of the Haredi world. But we've been neighbors of the Rosh Hashiva for the past 30 odd years. And we've been extremely close. And the first thing I can say is that I'm sure that he noticed the change in my look, the change in the type of chinuch we were giving the children and so on. Never once did he make any comment on hashkafa. He just wasn't interested in it. And I look back and I saw, so when he was in Canada, his main Rebbe and his Rebbe Muvak in Halacha was Rav Hirschsprung. Rav Hirschsprung's hashkafas were somewhere close to Satmar. That didn't bother him in the slightest. As far as he was concerned, and he often said, he said, I'm not telling you to listen to me. You have the information, I'll help you, but you have to make your own mind up. Now, we brought up a family here in Ma'ale Adumim. Our boys, 5 boys, most of their chinuch was in Haredi institutions. For them, Rabbi Rabinovitch was the Gadol Hador who lived next door, more or less. Now, they treated him with immense respect. My father-in-law, Olav Shalom, who moved here 20 years ago and passed away about 4 years ago, was a product of Slobodka Kol Torah, was Yotze V'Nichnas with the Chazon Ish in the 1950s, and he almost idolized Rabbi Rabinovitch. There was a quality in him which would cut across hashkafas completely, even though he had his own very, very, very clearly defined hashkafas. Yet it was a cardinal principle for him, and someone in the yeshiva pointed out that he actually held that the Rambam did not have 13 Ikarei Imunah. He actually had 14, but he hid the 14th one in Hilchos Deos, I can't remember where, and for him the 14th Ikar was Bechira Chofshit. And he said, and this was mentioned in one of the Haspedim someone in the yeshiva gave, that this may be the reason why the Rambam divided the Yad into 14 sections. So, what did I get from him? I got my life's derech limud. I've written various memorim on the most obscure parts of the Rambam. One of them was published, the others, one of them's written but not published, the others are still in my head. But it was incredible. One of the biggest things I ever worked on was the 9th perek of Alois, known as Perek Kaveret, the 19th perek of Hilchos Tumas Meis, and a great deal of the Shakalataria on that was done on the way home from Shul on Shabbos Mincha. Week after week, often standing on the steps of his home for 20 minutes or half an hour, until we finally reached a sensible conclusion. And the same I can say about other things. How many people are there in the world that you can stop and ask a question in virtually any area of Torah and get almost a sure kloli straight away? I can tell you virtually none. And in fact, when I had to revise this mamar for publication, I went to a cousin of mine who'd written 3 books on Taurus and is now a Rosh Hashiva of the 5th biggest yeshiva in Israel. And I asked him if he could go over it, and he said, well, since I've become a Rosh Hashiva, I don't have time to be in Taurus anymore, and I have to learn Yeshiva Masechtas. But go to Ploni Almoni in Bnei Brak, he's a big mumche on this. You understand? That's where I had to go. I had to go to someone living in Bnei Brak who'd written Sforim on this subject, who'd spent his life working on this topic, yet Rabbi Rabinovitch was there all the time in that subject, and the next day I could ask him something about Yevonus, and the day after I could ask him about Shvis, or Hilchos Shabbos, or anything under the sun. I think it's fitting. I'm going to share with you two small Chidushei Torah and a bombshell. Two small Chidushei Torah which I happened to stumble upon in the last 2 weeks, and which, without question, demonstrate his approach to learning. Just 1 second. The first is a halacha in Shvis, and it comes from a Mishnah in Perek Gimel of Shvis. It's not a difficult Mishnah to understand. Don't get all worried. And this is not going to be very long. The Mishnah talks about how one piles up dung in a field during Shemitah, so it shouldn't be construed as if you were fertilizing your field. And and the Mishnah says, עד כמה הם מזבלים? עד 3 השפטות לבית סאה, של 10 משפלות של לתך. To cut out what the explanation of the Mishnah is, basically speaking, you can make up to 3 large piles of a minimum size, and the reason for the minimum size is so that it shouldn't look as if you're fertilizing the field. Now, the Mishnah then goes on to say that you cannot make more than 3 piles. The next Mishnah says that you can make more than 3 piles if you dig down 3 tfachim or build a platform 3 tfachim high. Now, what do you do if you only have a little bit of dung? Are you allowed to build it up slowly? So the Mishnah says that you can do so. And then along comes Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, and this is the critical thing, and he says, well, not just like that. You need to dig down 3, or build up 3, or put it on a rock. Now, the interesting thing is that when the Rambam writes in Hilchos Shmita, what to do if you make more than 3 piles of dung in your field, he writes as follows. He says, Hayam ma'amid hazevel al hasela, or shehe'emik ba'aretz 3 tfachim, is paskening like Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah against Chachomim. So I looked in Yad Pshuta on the Hilchot Shvit, and Rabbi Rabinovitch explains, no, he's paskening like Chachomim. But he doesn't comment on, well, he does comment. He says that the reason why you can put it on a rock is not because of Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, but because that is something basic. And there's a very fundamental idea which he often talked about. When you have something more basic, then it's obvious to everybody. So Chachamim are moideh that, of course, if you have a rock, you can put the dung on the rock. Creating an artificial rock, you dig down 3 tfachim or build up 3 tfachim. But the most basic thing is that which is natural. By the way, in Hilchos Shabbos, he explains that the reason why the Rambam puts a tel, 10 tfachim, before an area surrounded by mechitzas is for that very same reason, that a tel is something natural and mechitzas is something artificial. Where's my chiddush? My chiddush is, and he doesn't talk about this in Yad Pshuta, but I am sure that if I were to say this to him, he would break out in a massive smile. And that is that the Rambam puts the rock first. Now, he doesn't mention this, but there's no question that the reason why the Rambam puts the rock first is because the Rambam, for the Rambam, as we were taught by Rav Nachum, for the Rambam order is very, very important. And he always puts the most important and basic thing first. So that is number 1. Simply came up over the last 2 weeks. I happen to be teaching in a Mishnah Shir. I'm teaching Shvis. Now, something else which I came back to from something which I worked on about 30 years ago, again, together with him, and which is typed up but not properly published, is the Shita of the Rambam in Hilchot Dam and Melicha. And now we all know that liver can only be grilled, and liver is considered as being full of blood. And the Rambam lists liver separately to the other Evorim when he talks about the blood. He talks about Dam HaEvorim, for example, and so on and so on and so on. And then he says, V'dam hanimtza b'kaved. So it's not surprising that the Rambam paskins that the kaved needs to be grilled or treated alternately. We won't go into all that. There's no need for it. It's not the purpose of what we're doing. But then the next halacha is weird, because the next halacha talks about the spleen, the tchol. And the Rambam says, Hatchol mutar levashlo afilu im habasar she'eino dam el habasar hadome ledam. Now, on the face of it, what the Rambam's doing is he's pasking halacha like a sugi in Chulin Kuf Yud Aleph, where the Gemara says that it says tchol isn't the same as liver. Tchol is shumna ba'alma, which means basically it's just meat, and that's it. But where's all this arichus come from? And I never considered it. Now, I should have considered it, of course, because the Rambam here is adding an awful lot of words which aren't in the Gemara and which aren't really necessary. What's he saying it for? But 2 weeks ago, I stumbled upon a tshuva of one of the Geonim. Oh, which one of the Geonim is it? Never mind. It doesn't matter. But it's one of the earlier Geonim who was a contemporary of Rabbi Chai Gaon. Never mind. I don't want to waste your time with it. It's also in Midrash Shochar Tov on Vayikra. And there it says, black on white, that there was a shita in the Geonim that the spleen needs to be grilled and cannot have melicha done on it. Not just the liver, the spleen as well. And there you have a reason for the Rambam. You see, very often Rav Nachum found sources for the Rambam in the Geonim. Here you have a situation where there was a shita in the Geonim where it was very important for the Rambam to stress that the halacha is not like that shita. So here we have two examples just simply came up over the last couple of weeks where, again, I stumbled upon, and because of the way I'd been taught to learn by him, two instances of cases where I came up with what basically is quite a major chiddush based on the mahalach of learning that we were taught to learn with him over the years. Now, what's the bombshell? The bombshell is the following. We'll go back 15 years ago. After my father, Olav Shalom, passed away 15 years ago, he encouraged, I wanted to learn, make a Siyum Hashas Mishnayos over the year, and he suggested that I learn it with Perush Mishnayos Rambam. Well, I'd often looked at Perush Mishnayos Rambam, but I'd never learned it Kaseda. So I sat down and decided, okay, we're going to learn it Kaseda. And we started off, and after I finished the first 2 or 3 Mishnayos, I was in a state of ecstasy, because nobody realizes what the Rambam packs into a small number of words in Perush Mishnayos. We all think he does that in the Yad, but not in Perush Mishnayos. Since then, my Mishnayos shir, which I've been giving for about 25 years, has almost migrated to being a shir on Perush Mishnayos Rambam on the Mishnayos. And unless I'm too lazy and give up, of course. About 10 years ago, I suggested to him that what the world is missing is an easy to read and understand Perush on the Mishnayos, which is entirely aliba the Perush Mishnayos, the Rambam, and the Yad. Basically speaking, his approach in Yad Pshuta, as he described it himself, was to understand the Rambam through the Rambam. And I, Baruch Hashem, this week after Shavuos, sat down, put pen to paper, or at least figurative pen to paper on the keyboard, and I've now almost completed the first 4 prokim of Masechet Brachot, And the aim is in Yirtzeh Hashem to now produce this completely easy to follow commentary on the Mishnayos, which is entirely Aliba de Rambam. And in his memory, I have decided to call it Yad Nachum, because he was the one who encouraged me to get on with it, even though it took me 10 years to sit down and do it. And he is the one who gave me the Derech Limud. I just want to finish with one final thing about the differences of Hashkafa. The influence that he had over our family and our boys was really something which is difficult to describe. I mean, yes, when they were smaller, they had a big bus stop, two of the boys, and we actually took them to him Motzei Shabbos, and they had a din Torah with him together. But we sat here isolated from the Levaya, which was very, very minimal, of course, because of the terrible virus, and watched what was going on. And two of our boys happened to be here at home, one still single, learning by remote control in the mirror, and the other one had just dropped in for the afternoon, and he was watching the Levaya with us. And they turned to me after the Levaya and says, "No, Abba, we're going to the Beis HaChaim now." And that was it. And this is, boys who their entire chinuch has been in Haredi Moistus. But for them, as I said before, Rabbi Rabinovitch was the Gadol Hador who lived next door. Thank you.
I have to go now, everybody. It was absolutely fantastic, and all had a great mitzvah. I just will say that I think the greatest quality he had was his anova, which made him approachable and connecting to so many people. And certainly for me, that was a great, great, great experience. I must go. Look after yourself. You should all be healthy. Bye.
Thank you, Sefton.
Mayor, with your permission, if Sefton has to go, let me just say a couple of little things about Sefton. Sefton
He's gone.
Yes, I know, but I think it's good for everybody to hear what he would have said. And I've been corresponding with him and speaking on the phone with him. Sefton was the Mazkir of Bnei Akiva in those days. And he lived in Jews College in town. And he went to Rabbi Rabinovitch with virtually every shaila that there was connected with Bnei Akiva. And he's told me some of the most amazing stories, which I didn't know about before. But I'd like to share something which wasn't to do with Bnei Akiva. At the time, he was studying to be a motor mechanic. And he told me that you go to these scrap yards and you buy parts from cars which are being scrapped. Now, these guys are all a bunch of crooks. Well, that's an understatement. And he said much worse about it recently when I talked to him about it. And he said, he went to Rabbi Rabinovitch and he said, look, it's the absolute accepted norm in that olam that you walk out of the scrapyard with a few bits that you haven't told them about. Is it mutter to do so? And Rabbi Rabinovitch gave him an absolute unequivocal no. Now, I am absolutely sure, I haven't looked into it, that somebody could have found a heter for it. And everybody who says Rabbi Rabinovitch was always Mako doesn't know what they're talking about. He had chumras about all kinds of things. But if it was an Issur Gezel, there was no question that he wasn't going to be machmir about that. Okay, I pass on.
Okay, Shakoch. Flora.
I've just been enthralled by everything that's been said by everybody. Now, I don't know if our revered Dr. Abraham Levy is with us still, but I say that, we're here for Rav Nachum Rabinovitch, that's Sal, but Rabbi Abraham Levy, there were more like him. Is he still in the room? Is the rabbi still in the room?
Yes, he's here.
He is. I just want to say, Rabbi Levy, I hope you can hear me. You've always been the voice of reason, and I've always said, would that there were more like you. So thank you for your kind contribution. Now, I knew Rav Nachum Rabinovitch as a B.Ed honors student, and then I did my master's, but I know he'd left by that time, but nevertheless, I felt his influence very, very much and would visit him very regularly in Eretz Yisrael when he lived in San Simon and followed him. Very sadly, the last few years since my beloved husband passed away, I found it very hard to visit Rabbi. Rav Nachum Rabinovitch. But I want to just say that I was president of Jews College, and I had the great zechut to give him a presentation. And I remember saying something, and I prepared it. I was great awe of this amazing Ilui. And I think I made a mistake somewhere. I can't remember. I surely made a mistake. And he was so kind, and he just waved it away. In fact, he didn't even acknowledge that it was a slight mistake. It was nothing terrible, but whatever. And I remember to this day, and I remember how wonderful it was that, he followed not to do halbanat panim. Anyway, I found Rav Rabinovitch as a person of really anav, a great humble man. He was very tall, very imposing, and yet there was something about him, as tall as he was, you felt when you were in his presence that he wanted to make himself smaller in a person's eyes. And I remember his chesed when I went to Russia, and I'll finish quite shortly because I don't want to keep you. I went to Russia and I came back and I was very, very moved by the whole incident. And he called me into his office and I couldn't believe it. So busy with everything, but Laura, how was it? Tell me then, what did you do? Who did you visit? What were the names of the refuseniks? And I explained to him, I gave a few shirim. And I remember one name, Weinstock, and he happened to know the family. He said, look it up. And it was something maybe simple, but very amazing to me, that there was this great Talmid Hacham who was interested in what I say call chesed. And I just want to say that he was a teacher that par excellence. You learned Gemara with him. I didn't. I sat and Gila Rosen, also I'm full of admiration for her because she really was outstanding in Gemara. She sounded very humble, but I know she was outstanding for anybody, for any student there. I used to sometimes listen in, and occasionally it was way above me. But I loved his lessons on Parashat HaShavua. And he always stressed that you have to look at the Peshat first. And I learned one little thing that I will tell you, it won't take me very long. I still teach a lot now, Baruch Hashem, inspired by Harav Sachs, by Harav Abraham Levy, who was also a mentor of mine, and of course Harav Nachum Rabinovitch Zatzal. But why am I telling you this? He used to say to the students, and we were all quite green, I don't want to hear what the Midrash says. I don't want to hear what Rashi says. I want to hear what is the Peshat. And we were learning Parashat Toldot, about the Birkat, well, we call it the deception. And Rabbi Nachum Rabinovitch really opened our eyes. I'm not going into it. We all know it very well. Was it a deception? In a way it was, because it says in the Torah, if I remember it correctly, V'yecherad Yitzchak harada gedola ad me'od. So obviously, according to Peshat, yes, he was deceived. But Rav Nachum Rabinovitch told us something, and I use it every single time. And I remember Rabbi Meir Fachler, you're here, your wonderful brother, who was nifter a few years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, I'm not sure when. He was an amazing Rav, and I went to one of his shiurim on this parasha, but I'm not quoting from him. But I told it to him afterwards, what Rav Nachum Rabinovitch said, and he thought this was wonderful. And I tell you what it was. It was very, very simple, but it was very insightful. He said, yes, Yitzchak Avinu was upset, and we won't go into was he deceived or not, but he said something. He asked us a question. How many berachot were there in this particular incident? And most of us would say 2. But Rav Nachum Rabinovitch said no. And we know that there were, in fact, 3. But how did he explain it to try and bring to us that there was no deception? He said, the first bracha, what was it? It was Yitzchak Avinu blessing Yaakov, thinking he was Esav. That was blessing number 1. Blessing number 2, Yaakov, no, sorry, not Yaakov, Yitzchak Avinu blessing Esav, knowing that he was Esav. That's when he cried and said, have you not one blessing for me? Then he said there was a blessing number 3, which we're all aware of. Yitzchak Avinu blessing Yaakov, knowing he was Yaakov. And he said, when he blessed him, what did he bless him with? And we all know it very well. My father gave me that blessing under the power, I remember it. But it was the blessing of the Birkat Abraham. So in other words, Rav Nachum Rabinovitch explained to us in very simple terms, but I felt very deep and insightful, and I use it every year, whether it's appropriate or not. Even matim or lo matim, I tell my class, this is for Rabbi Nachum Rabinovitch. I want to tell you this. There were 3 brachot. It seems when you read the brachot that Yitzchak Avinu was not at all deceived. If he was deceived, he would have given that blessing, the very first blessing, thinking that Yaakov, he would have given the bracha to Abraham. He didn't. He waited till he knew that he was in fact blessing the person who deserved, who was Zocher to be our 3rd father of the Shlosh Avot. And I wanted to share that with you because you might say, well, it's very simple. But for me, this was a teacher par excellence. He was teaching teachers to teach. And we never lost sight. And I never lost sight. Whenever I teach Rashi, I always go into the Peshat. Rav Nachum Rabinovitch's voice is ringing in my ears. Look at the Peshat first, and then from there you can go where you want to, obviously. So I really want to say, I really cried when I heard how Rav Nachum Rabinovitch died, because I didn't know him that closely. As I said, I always held him in much awe, but he was somebody that was so brilliant, but so modest with it. And our own Rabbi Jonathan Sachs will never, ever stop praising him and saying that he was a great influence on my life. And I think that is a real accolade. And may Yehi Zechro Baruch and Min HaShamayim Tanuchamu to all of us students, because we are really bereft. It's been a great loss to us. And thank you, Meir. You've all spoken so beautifully. I've learned so much from you. And I want to say that I do hope that we continue, even if it's once a year, on the Haskara of our Rav, that we should really continue in this vein. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks so much, Flora. And thank you also for passing this on to so many of your colleagues, the students of the doing the B.Ed at the time at the college. Now's the time, really, if there's anybody who wants to say anything, just take the mic or raise your hand. Now's the time if you want to. There's some newcomers here as well. Lewis, bavakasha.
I was in the position of running, I think, twice a week through the streets of London to get to Nachum Shir. I was teaching at the time at School of in African Studies, and a Jews College was still Montague Place. And I used to go and listen to his Shir on Sukkah, a small band of students. And apart from what we've already heard, and always saying, look at the pasuk. In fact, he went beyond saying that. He said, look at the context of the pasuk. Always go back at least one pasuk and go forward one pasuk. That's one thing that I've always taken from him. Another thing I remember very vividly, which I've come to unwittingly use with my students when we come to an issue of terminology where there seems to be a binary category, either the one or the other. And I remember sitting with him, learning about Diras Alai, in other words, a temporary nature of a sukkah. And I remember him saying, look, it's not a question of is it Alai or is it Kavua? It's not like that. There are different elements, factors that go to make up what the Gemara says is a Dirat Arai. And I've come to realize that in so many avenues of academia, your students want to jump and think that everything is an either or an or. To use a mathematical term, many things are orthogonal. There are different dimensions that add up to that category that we're seeing. And I don't know where that all comes from. Was that his own thinking? Was it something which is part and parcel of a general approach, maybe the Chaim's approach to learning, I don't know, but every time I come to explain an apparent binary to my students, I think of that din in Sukkah. And finally, I just mentioned one particular psak that he gave me. I would always hurry up to it. I think the first time I asked him a question, it was the very early years of computing, and I wanted to know, what if the divine name appears on the screen? Can I actually shut it off? And to my undying shame, I can't remember exactly what he said. Knowing what I've heard today, he would probably have said, he wouldn't have said something like, always go for the easy option. But then I asked him one day, can I eat before davening? This was something that really bothered me when I was younger. And he said, no, you can't have mazonos. And then I don't know quite how I took this. He said it's zivche mesim. It's like, now I don't know if this is a quote from the Gemara or from Rambam. So from that day, I stopped having mazonos before davening on Shabbos. And I've suffered for it tremendously, but I'm sure that I will owe him a great credit at some point in my life, or maybe in the hereafter. So thank you, Mayor, for allowing me to say a few words. And I agree, he was the most humble of teachers that I've ever had.
Yes. Who else would like to say a few words? Did you raise your hand, Shmuel? You're muted.
I've always been greatly admiring of Lewis, and any time that Lewis looks up to something, I say, this is something to take attention to. I've been a colleague of Lewis for many, many, many years. I used to be at SARS myself. In fact, from before the time Lewis started until after he left. And I always listened to him with rapt attention to any advice, and also for advice about what books to get for the library. So I feel most humbled and honoured to be able to have heard him speak those words of someone he himself absolutely had great awe and honour for. So that's all I really wanted to say.
Toda rabba. Anyone else? It's we did say sort of tentatively this would be till 10 o'clock. This is definitely an opportunity if anybody wants to. If not, so I just want to raise something. This was wonderful. I'm so pleased that everybody could join us. It took me back to those amazing days that we all experienced together. I'm a little bit, can't say I'm surprised, but I'm a little bit upset that Anglo Jewry has done so far nothing to commemorate Rav Nachum's passing. I do understand from Rabbi Levi that they are planning something. The Montefiore Foundation is planning to do something. I know that Jews College doesn't exist anymore, but there is a new Gilgul of it in NSJS. I don't know whether anything is going to happen there. And therefore, what I would like to raise here amongst us is that we should possibly, as a group, do something beyond this wonderful group of 20 people who turned up here, and do something zechro. I don't know if it'll be something like this or something of a different nature, but I do feel that many of us who were part of the Moadon Yedidei Anglia, and possibly continue it here as well, I think it would be fitting for us to do something. And the WhatsApp group is open and you can join it. And I think it would be a good forum for us to discuss sometime within the year to do something a little bit more than just what we're doing. At least I would like to. And usually that means that something's going to happen. But I would love to open this up and get input and initiative, and let's see what we can do. I also want to congratulate Michael on his starting off this Yad Nachum Perush HaMishnayot. I think it's an incredible it's first of all, it's something which is so needed, and it's a wonderful thing to memorialize the Rav in such a way. And tamamash talmid muvhak. It's not somebody who's once heard something. You've been with him for many years. You also combine with your degrees in computers and your knowledge of Torah. So I'm just on behalf of everybody here saying kol hakavod on this yozma, and I really hope that it'll happen because you're behind it. I'm just saying it should take off, and it should be lizchut kulanu and lizchut nishmato shel harav. So with that, I'd like to close off this meeting. It is the Rav Shloshim. I was the Chazan tonight in Arvit before I opened the Zoom, and I said Kaddish leZichro, or whatever one says Kaddish for. It's not quite leZichro, but I said Kaddish anyway, because I think that we're all feeling when you lose a Rav that you are also in Avilut. It's not exactly the same as Avilut for a parent, but it's damn close. And thank you, everybody. And Bezrat Hashem, we will continue to be inspired. And I was speaking to Rabbi Levi before everybody joined, and Rabbi Levi said that he is convinced that the influence of Rabbi Rabinovitch after he's gone on to Olam HaEmet is going to only grow and grow, and people are going to finally realize how important he was for our generation, and his contribution in his approach and his learning and in his Sfarim. And this is something which is only going to get more and more. So I second that, Rabbi Levi. Thank you so much, everybody. Erev Tov.